No.
Welcome to the Psychology Podcast, where we give you insights into the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity. I'm Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and in each episode I have a conversation with a guest who will stimulate your mind and give you a greater understanding of yourself, others, and the world we live in. Hopefully we'll also provide a glimpse into human possibility. Thanks for listening and enjoy the podcast. Today, it's a great pleasure to have Gwen Gordon on the podcast. Gordon began her career building Muppets for Sesame Street. Since leaving Sesame Street, Gwen developed Awakened Play, a play-based approach to making behavior change irresistible and transformation delightful. She has applied her insights in organizations ranging from San Quentin Prison to the MIT Media Lab and from IDEO to PepsiCo. Along the way, Gwen has collected a master's degree in philosophy and an Emmy Award in children's programming. Her latest book is The Wonderful W, which is the first picture book for grownups. Hey, so great to chat with you today, Gwen.
Great to be here with you, Scott.
Is this the first, I just want to clarify something, is this the first picture book for grownups you've done or that ever in the history of the world?
Well, being a complete authority on the history of the world, I can say definitively, I have absolutely no idea. No, there have definitely been picture books for grownups. And it's actually not even my first picture book for grownups. It's the first one I've published, though.
Okay, the first one you published. Well, cool. I mean, I loved it. I still do love it. I love it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I always love hearing that.
Well, let's talk about the plot a little bit of The Wonderful W, but maybe we shouldn't give away like the ending or something because we want people to like buy it, right? So like the basic premise, that we try all sorts. Well, you can tell me if my interpretation of the basic premise is correct after reading it, but that we try to fill our deficiency, our hole in our hearts up with so many of the wrong things that we think are going to fill us up that maybe only temporarily do so. And we very rarely, we spend almost our whole lives avoiding ourselves and looking and examining what lies deep within. Is that a fair summation?
That's a good encapsulation. I would add a few things, but I'm impressed.
Oh, thanks. No, feel free to add or modify or change. That's what I got from it. And, it resonated so much with me because of, I consider myself a humanistic psychologist, and the core philosophy of humanist psychology is becoming a whole person and living an examined life, So I just resonate with me so much. It's such a wonderful book. So congratulations on it, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. One of my favorite teachers told me once that every strategy we have as personalities, adjusting, managing, negotiating our world, everything is actually fear of the void.
Yeah.
And the void being really the sense of our own sort of deep hunch about and this is a spiritual perspective. So, this won't include everybody listening, I know, but it's the hunch that we actually don't exist as a solid, separate self. And everything we're doing is trying to compensate for the sense of deficiency that comes from that basic lack of substantial self outside of our defenses against it.
It's so
that's
true.
It's a big leap.
Oh no, it's an existential leap. It's great. Have you come across Irving Yalom's work?
No.
Oh, you'd love it. You'd love it. He talks a lot about, we have this need for belonging, but then there's like a deeper, like existential need for belonging. It's like actually Carl Rogers talked about this a lot too. We have this like superficial need to belong, but then there's this other kind of like deeper awareness of the fact that we will always be separate no matter what we do, no matter what we engage ourselves in, no matter how much we try to associate with people to fulfill that need. There will always be this existential need because we are ultimately, at the end of the day, die alone. It's not a very uplifting view.
Yeah,
but
it characterizes as existentialists very well. I think the book is really, and my own philosophy is not existential. I actually have had direct...
It's not as depressing.
No, it's not. And by the book that there's actually a way to
I know.
experience wholeness. And it comes from really facing fully and experiencing without any resistance that sense of deficiency.
Yeah.
That's the doorway. to the sense of wholeness. And that's the wonderful W, turning the holes into wholes.
Well, reading your book made me feel better about my existence than reading existential philosophy, but I don't know who's more right. I hope you're right.
Well, that alone, that was worth it.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about, you're such an interesting human being and have done so many varied things. I'd like to back up a second and go back to age 19 when you got your dream job. Tell me about that.
Oh, well, that was the job working for the Muppets. There's a story about how I got the job. There's a story about being at the Muppets. What are you most interested in?
I want to know, what that time period, what was going on at Sesame Street at that time. I want to know everything. Who did you interact with? Which Muppets did you meet? Did you meet Kermit the Frog? Did you have a conversation with Kermit the Frog? This is what I want to know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, those are very important questions, and I'm glad I can answer them. I have met Kermit the Frog
You
quite
have?
intimately, quite
Intimately?
deeply. Yeah.
Whoa.
I have performed surgery on Kermit the Frog. I've explored his inner world.
Oh my gosh. This is a G-rated podcast, Gwen.
Yeah, well, it might comfort your listeners to know that he doesn't actually exist from the waist down.
Oh, okay.
So,
we don't
knowing
want to put an explicit rating on this chat then.
knowing him in the biblical sense is actually still quite superficial. Yeah, so there were only 5. So when I came to Muppets, it was 1984, possibly 3. And I'm terrible with dates. And I actually arrived. I, you know what? Actually, this is coming full circle. I got the job partly because of a puppet that I made that I had never made a puppet before, and I decided I would just try one. And I sent it. It was a big bird called Clyde, and I sent the bird as if he was applying for the job, with a little note saying, Big Bird's my favorite role model. I'm ready to re-nest. Rock. And then I got the interview, and what I brought to the interview was I wrote and illustrated a children's book for grownups, my first one, when I was 16, called I think in my last life I must have been a rabbit.
Mm.
And it was for my college application. I actually was in Holland my senior year, and I wasn't that motivated to focus on my big, college career. I was actually having a great time, and I thought, well, I'll write this book, and they got my test scores, I got everything else, but I'll write this book, and I'll send it, and if I don't get in, I probably won't go to college. And it was my first choice, early decision school, actually probably Wesleyan, which is right near your alma mater.
Yeah.
So I got in, which luckily I would not have probably gone to school. It's my only college application, and I brought this book to my interview at Muppets, and was wearing everything I wore I had made. So that got me the job. And it was at the time they were making Muppets Take Manhattan. So they needed
nice. I love
help.
that. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Wait, did you work on that movie?
Yeah, I made the fish in the fish scene where they're throwing fish at the theater.
Yeah, of course.
So that was sort of the summer job, but in the fall, Sesame Street season goes from September to January. So they kept me in to work on Sesame Street, and Sesame Street only had a team of 4 or 5 people. Let's see how many people. 1, 2, 3, 5 people. So we were responsible for everything. We would read scripts every week, and we'd make a list of all the things that were needed. And sometimes there were new characters that came in, and sometimes they were anything Muppets, just like anonymous girl, father.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they involved the classic characters in costumes, and sometimes there were props like Slimy the Worm's basketball court, or Snuffleupagus's nose flute, or a bunch of singing bananas, or that kind of thing. And we just would,
I love
rip
singing
through
bananas.
that list. Yeah, I made a chorus of singing bananas. And so, yeah, we would build stuff each week. And I was really lucky. My first year, I got to design new characters, because we just drew sketches when there were new characters, and sent them up to Michael Frith, who's the art director, and he would choose the ones he liked. And my very first year, he chose my characters. So they were the rock heads, these little rocks that would come alive when someone walked by them. So yeah, so we would repair Kermit, we would refurbish Grover. We were like every time there was a shoot, we'd come bring the puppets back and clean them up and polish their eyeballs and call it a day.
Yeah, I just Google imaged the Rockheads, and I'll put a picture up on the show notes. That's so
Is there
cool.
actually a shot of the Rockheads?
Oh, there's hundreds and hundreds. In fact, there's a whole Muppet wiki page
Oh my goodness.
about the Rockheads, a group of characters who lived on an empty lot on Sesame Street. They were created to teach the concept of what is alive and what is not. Is that true?
Levy, I have to Google now to see if they're the same ones because who knows? Maybe later on they were like
Well, I'll just put in your chat window
Okay.
the link.
Oh, good. Okay.
They appeared in episode 1939, where they tried to decide how many of them there would be if one of them left, with David teaching them subtraction to figure out. At the end of the same episode, they provide a rock concert doing their own rendition of the Sesame Street theme. Is this ringing a bell at all?
Those weren't shot. Those episodes weren't shot when I was there for. Oh, there we go. Excuse me. Yeah, those are my characters.
Yay!
Oh my God.
Yay!
That's too funny. Yeah.
Yes.
Those were that was my very first year. I was 19 years old and I created and designed these little
Well, they
lumps
should give you credit on the wiki page. They link.
Oh, nobody gets individual credit.
Oh, okay.
It's always just
Well, you're getting credit
workshop.
now because it's on the record now at the Psychology Podcast.
Oh, Ed Christie. No, it actually gave credit to. Oh, that's funny. It gives credit to Ed Christie,
Oh.
who did not design and build them. He absolutely did not.
That is not cool.
I have been ripped off.
Yeah, that is actually not cool. So
I love Ed.
yeah.
He's a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not designed and build those puppets.
Yeah, good. Well, we're going to correct the record right now. We love doing that on the Psychology Podcast. So let's move on in your life. Then you designed computer PlayStations for children. Is this before computers were computers?
Well, no, this was like, let's see, 85, 80.
Oh, wow.
This was after Muppets. So it was the heyday of the Media Lab, when interactive multimedia was exploding onto the scene. And Marvin Minsky, who's the sort of father of artificial intelligence, and Alan Kay, one of the Apple luminaries, were there. And I felt like Forrest Gump. I was like getting to be in all these places with the originators and the stars of the field. So Alan Kay was our advisor for the Vivarium. It was an Apple research group that was exploring how to teach children about animal behavior. And there was a master's thesis project in that lab, and they wanted to create this big furry computer PlayStation. This was when the Apple IIgs was.
Oh my gosh, that was my first computer.
Yes. So I ended up developing on the 2GS even after that. I remember hearing that from you. So
you heard that
amazing.
from me?
Well, I was, listening to some interviews that you did.
Did I mention at some point? Because that was my first computer. Oh, I've talked about it before.
Yes.
I don't remember talking about it before. But that's so cool. That you heard that. Yeah, that was my first computer, and my grandmom bought it for me because she wanted to. She thought that I would take to it, and I instantly took to it. I actually started programming games on it. I programmed this game called Mystery, what I still have saved. I have the Apple IIgs in my basement. I wonder if it's worth something. I wonder if it's worth something now. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were trying to. The computer was housed inside the creature's stomach. You can actually do another Google search for Noobie, Noobie.
Okay.
MIT Media Lab. It was in Stuart Brand's book. So it's this
wonderful
creature, and they wanted Muppets to make it, to build it for them, but they were coming into some problems with the IP, and so the workshop. I had moved to Cambridge by then, and the workshop leader, Jim Morrison, his name, he sent them to me. He just said, "Gwen will build it. Just she's there, no problems." So I just became part of the team, and I was building this big creature. And then I also did all the animations because it was basically like a huge Mr. Potato Head that you just squeeze the different body parts, and an animated version would appear on the screen and cycle through whatever different kinds of those body parts. Where if you're squeezing the hand, it might become a claw or a fin or any number of things. So you could create your own animals by sight, like Mr. Potato Head, and then find out how they survived in different environments. And that was the way children learned. And so I did all the animations and the user and all the UI and just got into that world. And then after leaving the lab, the woman whose master's thesis that was, and I started a company called Telltale Technologies, and we were creating other kinds of alternative input devices, mostly stuffed animals, because that seemed to be what I could do. So yeah, that was that chapter.
Oh, cool. You're such an interesting person. So let's move on. You got a master's degree in philosophy. I was wondering, how have you applied philosophy? Do you apply it in your work?
Um, oh yeah. Well, it was really like, all these different seeds that were there as a child. I was, even at Muppets, I was taking critical theory classes at night at the new school.
Mm,
So I'd be constructing Muppets during the day and deconstructing them at night, and thinking really critically about what are we really doing? What are messages are we conveying with these characters that we're not necessarily conscious of? Kermit being a reptile, as the leader, a cold-blooded, like essentially green male, I mean
yeah.
white male, and the mayhem that he's able to hold, and that the feminine Miss Piggy is like femininity, femaleness occupies the entire landscape of her
Wait,
personality.
have you met Miss Piggy?
Oh yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, I had such
Of
a
course.
crush on Miss Piggy when I was 5 years old. I've never admitted that to anyone before.
Wow, I think you might be rare. I
Really?
think Miss Piggy is slightly designed to repel or scare men.
I never knew that. I missed that memo. I thought she was like really fierce.
Well, you're in luck because she is an archetype, and I'm sure that many women carry that, so you might be able to find it somewhere.
That's hilarious. Okay, okay.
Anyway, so I was,
Anyway,
even at the media lab, I was very much wasn't just happy making. I am happy making, but I am also really a thinker, and so I was asking difficult questions, and like, is this really good? How do we know this is, what we're doing is really
yeah,
of service? And anyway, so it was like a wonderful thing to be able to finally focus my full attention on the philosophical questions that I always had.
good.
So that really, what that did was it shifted me from just being a creator to being reflecting on creating, and
Sure.
reflecting on the deeper principles that apply to a creative life. And that's when I started actually looking to understand play, or I wasn't really looking to understand play. I had a deep intuition about play, like that it had a potency that was beyond the way it'd been, characterized and trivialized in our Protestant work ethic, culture. So I was drawn, studying philosophy sharpened my tools for cracking the nut that I had always had around the sense of what is this power of play.
Yeah.
And so that definitely shifted my life. After studying philosophy, I started teaching about. I also studied cosmology and was looking at deeper evolutionary principles, and just the question of ultimacy. From through different lenses. Like, what are the ultimate physical principles from a cosmological perspective? What are the ultimate philosophical principles? What is happening here? And what are we here for? And how do we participate fully in this 17 billion year old universe that gave rise to us? And just what is life for and about,
Yeah.
and what does play have to do with that? So
What's the answer?
42.
I don't have no now I have no I don't have to do any more podcast episodes ever again. I got it.
We're a full service podcast interview.
Well, how you applied your work to lots of domains. I mean, how do you help Weight Watchers, with play? Like, can I play my way to lose 50 pounds?
We're really bouncing around. Yeah,
It's all connected. It's all
it
connected.
is. It absolutely is. So I was glib when I said 42, of course, but it's obviously you were not entirely serious about the question. And
Of course.
it's something I've unpacked a lot, and how it applies. So I've been looking at, well, what are the insights that I've got? How can I apply the insights that I've gotten about power of play? And with Weight Watchers, I was brought in to help create a more playful meeting experience,
Okay.
and to help socialize the whole organization around the value of play, which has historically been, since they're also very rooted in hard science as as rationale for everything they do. They hadn't really caught up on the hard science of play, and they always thought of play as something that was versus everything they were trying to do. And I was really shifting their perspective to see it as via everything they were trying to do.
Yeah. And did you do that with Pepsi? Is that what you did with Pepsi as well, and AARP, and basic? That was the basic theme of what you were brought in for.
No, each one was really different. AARP was hatching their hatchery, which is their innovation think tank. They're now well known for it. They took a big leap and brought themselves fully into a 21st century innovation culture with this beautiful space called the hatchery to innovate new products and ideas. And I was brought in to do some workshops on one of the principles for innovation, which was how to bring in fresh thinking. That was just a workshop and training and support in their general project of innovation culture. And I was brought in really almost purely as a thought leader on play, because they had an entrepreneurial venture called Wello, which they were developing for women over 50. So I had just hit 50. So I was like in their demographic.
Congratulations.
That was like 5 years ago. Do the math. And they had found me, I had done a Kickstarter for a film I was producing about play. And so they wanted me to sort of be the face of their culture, the play culture that they were cultivating for their market. So I would go, instead of sponsoring events for that population, they wanted to create experiences for those events. So I'd go to conferences and gatherings and offer these play workshops, and they were sponsored by Wello, which was PepsiCo.
Very cool. I'm sure they benefited greatly. I wonder if it benefited the taste of the Pepsi product at all.
Yeah, this was actually a non-sugar
I know.
based. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a complex world.
It is. It is. Well, there's lots of moving pieces of each organization.
Yeah, the women who were spearheading this were really had a shared sense, as I do, of what health meant and well-being.
Sure.
So there wasn't a tension there. There was within the larger organization, but not within the group that I was part of.
Cool. It probably was more fun to work with that part of the group. Just wanted to take this moment to thank you all for your support of the podcast over the years. It's been a real privilege to do this podcast for you all for the past 4 years. It's been a real labor of love. If you'd like to further support the podcast, I wanted to let you know a few things you could do to help make it a better experience for you all. First, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the Psychology Podcast on iTunes. This would help make the show more prominent on iTunes and increase our listenership. I believe you can subscribe both on your iPhone and on your computer. Second, it'd be great if you could give the show a rating and review on iTunes. I definitely read all the reviews, and they're helpful to others who are thinking about giving the show a listen. Another thing you can do is donate something to the show. Even just the price of a cup of coffee would really help me continue to do this podcast for you all. To donate something, you can go to thepsychologypodcast.com and click on the link at the bottom that says Become a Sponsor. So thanks again for your incredible support of the show over the years. You know, I do the show for you all because I truly love sharing my enthusiasm and love of the mind, brain, and creativity, and I really appreciate you joining me on this journey. Okay, now back to the show. So, how can play save the world? I mean, you talk about how you believe in the, quote, the gospel of play. So, do you view yourself as an evangelist? Wait, how do you pronounce that word?
Evangelist.
Do you view yourself as an evangelist of play?
It's actually evolved a lot since I was, spreading the gospel of play. What I've seen is that the play message is actually getting mainstream attention. And I don't know if you can hear my pug coughing, but apologies for all random.
How was your pug? It sounds like a human.
It's a pug.
Your pug is like, whops a lot of power there.
Oh, dear. I'll try to cover the mic.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so I used to be sort of passionately spreading the gospel of play because I knew that it was a kind of fundamental force and primal survival drive, but also evolutionary drive. So it seemed to me that this was the way not only that we would find balance and reduce stress and all and generate creativity, all the benefits that play confers,
Mm.
but it was also like our potentially our it was an expression of our true, I'll say, true nature. Like humans, homo ludens, are inherently playful. So it was like a sort of deeper, let us be humans, like let's connect to this deep life affirming drive. And that's a very particular lens for play that, because it's been so suppressed, and so we are so play deprived as a
Oh, yes.
such individualistic and competitive. And I mean, I like to call it the proving ground. We've left the playground, we've landed on either a proving ground or a battleground, and I wanted to restore the playground.
Yes.
And yet what I really saw was, that message at one point was really important because it countered this strong tendency to elevate seriousness as if it's the same as value. And there were just a lot of messages that it felt important that play could counter, that would restore some balance. But what I started to see was, as after Stuart Brown's book, which was New York Times bestseller on play, and it started to diffuse into the system, it started to get co-opted by every agenda. You
That's
had,
what happens.
yeah, and so organizations were like, we're going to use play to become more productive, and we have it used as, it's a great stress reliever. Charlie Hohen's work is wonderful, but it was sort of utilitarian, like, and you could see that there's a shadow side to play. Play is not always
Really?
not life affirming. Oh yeah,
No, I'm just joking.
yeah.
I know there is.
So yeah, so I actually started writing to it felt like the movement had gone far enough that it required some reflection and some distinctions about what kind of play actually transformed proving ground mindsets into playground mindsets, and what kinds of play reinforce it. Like putting a ping pong table into a game room at a corporation which is cutthroat and competitive isn't going to necessarily turn it into this like joy, life affirming, joy filled playground. It's like you can use any play, any kind of play, from a mindset of proving and battling, and that it won't necessarily shift the mindset. So I was looking at the play that reinforces it, the play that opposes it, the play that reforms it, and the play that transforms it. And they're really different. And then I even went further and was looking at, well, I've had play groups and I was working with people who just wanted to play more. And what I saw was that inevitably you'd find blocks, right? So, at first there'd be like a wild animal released from captivity. Wow, I get to play, permission and games and structures and some safety and awesome, like freedom. But eventually, you'd start to see the backlash and the blocks and the proving ground, the fears, and the places, basically because play is freedom. It's like any place in which we weren't free started to show up, and even the backlash of shame of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or inhibitions, or and as a first layer was to play with the blocks to play, which helped, whatever. It's like taking the part of us that's free and using it to help liberate the parts that aren't. But essentially, eventually, it gets to the parts that are just can't play with the blocks to play, and just need holding, and just need the soothing and like the space to be with fairly difficult emotions. And so it became a bigger journey around, well, how do we get to liberate the playground? People said that they're living on a playground became really like, how do we heal ourselves at the deepest level, where because those are the places where we're not playable, where life isn't play. So in order for life to be play, it really is the path to wholeness. It's like facing all the parts that don't feel capable of playing, and using play, the playful part of us, as a resource, to the extent that we can.
Beautiful. I loved your articles about that, about how not all play is transformative and how we can, as you say, restore the playground. because you say the playground is our true habitat.
Yeah.
But, in kind of when you talk about these principles or these ways that play can reinforce, reform, oppose, or transform, I really like this notion of a single like guide to when it is transformative. That being, how much does it feel like you're going against the inertia of who you are and the world, or going against it? I really like that metaphor. You say, quote, "It's just a heck of a lot more fun to play tug of war than it is to be at war with the world." What a great summation of maybe a compass for understanding when your play is being transformative versus when it's coming from a place of deprivation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the whole idea of being able to play tug of war, play with that battling energy versus sort of merging with it and just acting from it. I mean, that's a really powerful step toward freedom. And actually, what Stephen Porges, the neurobiologist, was the first articulator of the whole vagal system as a third part of the nervous system. Are you familiar with that? The whole
No,
vagal
I'm really.
ventral
The
system.
vagal. Yeah, I absolutely am.
Yeah.
Like Barbara Fredrickson has done some
Uh huh.
good research on that topic. Yeah.
Stephen Porges wrote a big tome called Vagal Theory. Anyway, he describes play as sympathetic arousal without fear. So that's why you see like chase play and fighting play and tug of war play in animals. It's like all the basic sympathetic arousal, fight, flight, right? But without fear, where all that tension gets released without the trauma response, without it being a trauma response. So I mean, sometimes I'll just like tap my partner, Tony, and say, chase me, chase me. Like,
Oh.
and it's like, oh, the joy, it's like this primal release, right? Just
Yeah.
chase. Or when you're, ready to fight with somebody, like, what would it be like to just shift to, you know, play fighting and just get that tension out? And that's the mastery. That's like being able to play with those activated states versus having to live in a world that's full of threat. And
Yeah.
like it turns the world into a playground, and then the threat is something playable.
I love it. Adult play really doesn't get nearly as much attention as childhood play, and childhood play doesn't get as much attention as it should. So
Yeah.
all that is true. What I just said. You know,
Yeah.
but oh boy, I just love the spotlight that you're shining on this. Well, it's funny because we shouldn't be ending this podcast with this question. We should have started with it. But what is play? I mean, you wrote a whole paper that I found fascinating, outlining the inherent paradoxes of play and how we should define it. So, like, how do you define it?
Well, I'm going to give you a couple of
Okay.
quick answers. So, play has in the Oxford English Dictionary, I think over 23, it might be 23 definitions.
Yeah.
And one of the ones I really like is movement. Like a rope has play if it has wiggle room, if it's not rigid. So the opposite of play is rigidity.
Oh, nice. I like that. Yeah.
And I think of the movement as the, flexible response to whatever it's time for. Like the capacity to respond to whatever it's time for. I'll go with that for now.
Wow.
Yeah, so what is play is probably my least favorite question. Like everyone wants to know and I hate answering it. Like I just I just find it, because I had to go into a post-rational
Of course.
mode in order to actually get moved toward it, and
Yeah.
I just find that that's not an easy zone to enter.
Okay, so you've written multiple articles. I've read all your articles in preparation for this interview. You wrote a great article about how play is essential stepstone to healthy childhood development. So can you maybe talk about why?
Sure. Well, so it's actually two angles. One was that I wanted to understand playfulness.
Yeah.
Like, where does playfulness come from? Why are some people more playful than others? What can we do about it? Is it just like a happiness set point where you just start to luck out? Because playfulness there's all these wonderful advantages in life, just like happiness does. And they're very related, of course. But I was looking at, well, how does our worldview get shaped, really so that we can see the world as a playground? And can we do anything about it if we aren't inherently playful? So that was
Yeah.
my interest. And so I was looking back at, well, where do worldviews come from? what are the early experiences that shape how we see ourselves and whether the world is safe or not? And because we play to the extent that we feel safe.
Yes.
So, assuming that everyone would naturally be playful to some extent, I mean, differently with different styles and different, but in that essential way of like have of the freedom to respond to what's needed in each moment and to be able to have their full expression in relation to as much of life as possible, which is another way to see play. I was interested in what are those experiences. So I saw that, the earliest experiences are the ones that have the biggest impact on our sense of safety.
Okay.
And of course, attachment is, our first universe is the relationship with our caretaker. So, this is basic attachment theory that our internal working models, right, are created by the level of security of that attachment bond. And what I
Yes.
saw was that, if you have an insecure attachment bond, if like, let's just start with the most insecure, a disorganized attachment, then you're likely to see the world as a prison. Like the world is fundamentally unsafe. There's nothing that we're not empowered. The best we could do is you know, just manage ourselves. And I mean, with disorganized, it's even difficult to do that. So it's like everything is threatening. We don't have the capacity to regulate enough even to do that. So it's very difficult for life to be play
Yeah.
when life is a prison. Then the next stage, an insecure attachment, avoidant, would be that life is a battleground, that everything's a threat. So it really has to do with the security reflects the degree of threat that we perceive as the world. And the degree of threat and security give rise to the level of play that we are capable of. So when we see the
Right.
world as when we got that insecure, intermittent, when the attachment caregiver was, you know, inconsistent, not emotionally or even violent, then the world is a threat and we feel like we live in a battleground and we perceive threat where it doesn't exist. So we're defended. So we actually, we
We
create the
put on our
reality by,
defenses.
yeah. So of course, you meet someone who's defensive and you're less likely to be friendly to them. And so the world actually shows up as threatening. Defensive people are scary. So you get scared. And so defenses escalate. And so you end up in a world that really feels like a battleground because you're seeing it that way and it's actually playing out to be that way. I'm really simplifying, as you know, and your listeners are sophisticated and will
Oh,
will
yeah.
see.
I mean, it's just so clear that you really love thinking about play in a really, really broad, holistic sense of its impact on the whole system of human nature, not, like you said, how it's been co-opted, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to just complete because when you see just the idea that when you do have secure attachment, then the world can be a playground. That then we can see realistic risk. We can perceive it as when it's realistic. It's not like suddenly a Pollyanna and everything is play, but we can sense when there is risk. And it's safe to have adventures. It's safe to express ourselves. It's safe to connect. And that gives us more playmates and new experiences. Ambiguous experiences aren't threatening. So the ambiguity and the unknown that is so much an inherent part of life is actually considered full of possibilities rather than full of threats.
Yes, and Abraham Maslow talked about defense versus growth, and
Yeah.
we limit our growth so much from erecting our defenses, and we need to play is a great way to get out of the comfort zone, right?
Yeah. Well, and we can play when we have enough security. So we take the level of security that we have and we can grow it by playing more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I love it. I mean, you do talk about, getting out of our boxes to enable creativity to flourish. You say the way you phrase it is by changing the preset radio station or turning the radio off altogether so that something new is possible. I feel like quoting you is enhancing this episode.
Yeah, I'll shut up so you can just tell me what I said.
Because Like you've said on the record so many beautiful things, right? That yeah,
And that goes right to your work on default mode networks, right?
it sure does, and
Yeah.
that's the seed of a lot of the psychological play for sure.
But isn't it? I mean, I was thinking about this because I did my research too, and I listened to a whole bunch of your talks and
Yeah,
interviews, podcasts, and it was really interesting because I started thinking about, well, default mode network is can just be a box, right?
yeah,
It's our identity. It's our default sense of self, right? So
yeah,
that can just be the old radio station playing over and over again. Most of the thoughts that we have that when we're not focused on something else in a different part of our brain are just habitual identity creating thoughts or
yeah,
identity thoughts. And that's why like psychedelics where the default mode network gets quiet and something new can happen, that's really getting out of the box.
yes,
Or like at the end of my like the way that the book will come full circle to the wonderful W, because the way that I wrote that initial seed for that story 10 years ago. And because I had this intuition and it was playful. I had a friend who lost her W in her welcome sign, and I wanted to give her a
yeah,
gift. I gave her a W, and I was thinking, oh, hole and hole, and like she should. What would happen if she fell into a hole? She'd need a W, and I had this feeling of like there's something really interesting about the relationship between holes and holes with a W. So I was playing with that, and I wrote her a story and gave her a W for her birthday, and that was 10 years ago. And I didn't quite know how the story ended. And I was trying to figure out how does the princess find her W? Where did she, really where do we get our W's?
yeah.
And I ended up going on a retreat with a meditation retreat, a silent retreat for 6 days. And I started as I got quieter and quieter. My mind became lucid, and I know I have this tendency when I get more and more lucid to like go, oh, good, my tool's sharp. Let me take it to some good problems. And so I was like, started thinking about things. I get quiet and then I go off and think about things. And I ended up like filling 69 pages of my journal
Wow.
on this retreat, writing 3 children's stories. And then like there's this other conventional book about play that I was writing. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I've got all this. And then I finally like it's almost like your identity starts to loosen, the default mode network gets quieter, it's like new ideas come. And I was thinking of it as like in the ozone layer when you get real if you were like to travel out or expand and you get really close to that final layer of your atmosphere of your
Yeah,
habitual self, like right there at the edge where the ozone's really thin, and you're starting to get like I was sticking antennas out into the like universe from my ozone.
yeah,
And I get all this stuff, right? And I called it absoluting because
yeah,
that outer zone is like the absolute, and I would just loot it. For my personality was still intact. But it was thin and it was, quieter, but I just grabbed these big buckets of stuff that I get like from the absolute, and all the answers to my question. And I would go back and fill my journal. And then at a certain point, I remember thinking, wow, this journal looks like everybody else's journal and my name isn't on it. What if I lose it?
yeah,
What if this, like this is some good stuff in here? And I started to like go, oh, mine, my ideas, which is the opposite of what's happening in meditation, right? Loosening of identification. And I had this impulse like I just want to write my name on my journal so I won't lose it.
yeah,
Started to write my name. You may not end up keeping this story in here in
yeah,
the podcast, but as I wrote my name, basically my whole identity just contracted
yeah,
right back,
sure.
and I was like, okay, I'm letting it go, and I'm just gonna let it go, and then I'm gonna put my journal in my room, and I just finally was like, it's not worth it. Like Gwen being a Gwen is not better than what's possible if I really let that default mode network go, like got quieter.
That's
And
very Buddhist of you.
it was a Buddhist retreat. And I did, and it was open, and it was like, ah,
Wonderful.
That's the W.
That's the W. And was this an inspiration for the book you wrote?
It was for the ending of the book. It's like I had to figure out how it
I
ended.
see. Yeah. Which we won't really
But we now
explicitly.
know the essence of it.
Yeah, but maybe they can fill in the blanks, but it's definitely worth getting. Well, thanks so much for imparting your wisdom on play for us today. I'm going to end with another one of your favorite quotes. Play is life force itself. When we can sense and amplify its most life-affirming, transformative impulses, it will point us directly to the playground. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Gwen.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Scott.
Thanks for listening to the Psychology Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com. That's thepsychologypodcast.com. Also, please add a rating and review of the Psychology Podcast on iTunes. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the podcast, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.